The archive is open. Come in out of the cold, your chair is where you left it, the one by the lamp. Tonight I've pulled something old from the shelves. It is Pompeii before the ash, a city caught not at a perfect moment, but in the middle of its ordinary work. You don't need to remember any of this. There's no test at the end. If you drift, I'll keep reading. Let's begin. Begin with a threshold. The stone has been worn lower at its center, where feet pass through a doorway opening onto the street, now called the Via dell'Abbondanza. Outside, the road is paved with broad blocks of dark volcanic stone. Raised stepping stones cross from one pavement to the other. Between them run grooves pressed into the road by wheels taking much the same lines, journey after journey. It is tempting to see every mark in Pompeii as belonging to one final day. The city encourages that mistake because so much survived together. Yet a threshold is worn over years. A wheel rut is made by repetition. A repaired wall may contain several generations of decisions, one layer of plaster covering another, a doorway narrowed, a shop opened where a different room stood before. Pompeii was not built as a Roman display and then sealed. It had a long history before Rome controlled it. People speaking different languages lived around this part of Campania, among them Oscan-speaking communities, Greeks along the coast, Etruscans, Samnites, and eventually Romans. Streets and sacred places changed as power changed. Buildings were enlarged, divided, damaged, purchased, inherited, decorated, and repaired. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Pompeii was a Roman colony and a busy town above the Bay of Naples. Farms and villas spread through the fertile country beyond its walls. Roads passed through the gates toward neighboring settlements, the coast, and the wider networks of the empire. Vesuvius stood to the north as part of the landscape. The people living below it did not leave us evidence that they understood the mountain as the danger we now know it to be. The city we will walk through tonight is especially marked by repair. A severe earthquake struck in the year 62, or perhaps 63 according to some ancient dating, and later tremors may have followed. 17 years afterward, some buildings had been restored handsomely. Others still held scaffolds, lime, patched masonry, altered rooms, and decoration left incomplete. That unfinished condition is not evidence of a city waiting helplessly. It is evidence of a city adapting. A damaged upper floor might be rebuilt. A room could change from domestic use to trade. Old material could be carried away and used elsewhere. A fresh rectangle of paint could prepare a wall for a new election notice. Work continued because ordinary life required it. Our evidence is rich, but it is not a complete photograph. Rooms were changed before the eruption. Objects were moved during it. People escaped carrying possessions. Others searched the buried city afterward. Early excavators tunneled for paintings and valuables. Walls exposed again to weather needed modern repair. Nearly every object has passed through more than one history. So we will move carefully. A loaf can tell us about grain, milling, shaping, and heat, but not the private thoughts of the person who made it. A name scratched near a doorway proves that someone wrote a name there. It does not provide a full biography. A fine dining room tells us what an owner wanted visitors to see, while the smaller rooms and upper floors where other people lived are more easily lost. Pompeii becomes more human when we ask less of each clue. The city does not need invented final conversations. It already gives us buckets, lamps, counters, drains, garden beds, millstones, paint pots, hinges, cups, and thresholds. These are quiet things, but together they show a place continually being made. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. In the stone street, outside our first doorway, two wheel grooves pass neatly between the raised crossing stones. No planner needed to mark the route in paint. Enough drivers had chosen it before, and the road remembered where the wheels should go. Step through the doorway, and the street gives way to a dim entrance passage. Beyond it, the house opens suddenly to the sky. At the center of many Pompeian houses was an atrium, a main hall with an opening in the roof called the compluvium. Rain passed through that opening into a shallow basin in the floor, the impluvium. From there, water could be guided into a cistern below and drawn again when the household needed it. The arrangement made weather part of the architecture. Light entered through the same square that admitted rain. On a clear day, it laid a bright shape across the floor. During a shower, drops fell inside, while the surrounding rooms remained under cover. A basin, a roof, and an underground chamber turned one brief storm into water that might last. This older household system remained useful even after Pompeii was connected to a large aqueduct network in the early imperial period. Aqueduct water reached the city at high ground near the Vesuvius Gate. At the distribution structure, now called the Castellum Aquae, channels divided the incoming flow. From there, lead pipes carried water downhill through a system that included raised water towers, public fountains, baths, and some private properties. Gravity did most of the moving. Water entered above the places where it would be used, and the slope of the city supplied pressure. The small towers helped manage differences in height and distribution. They were not elegant monuments. They were working pieces of infrastructure built where the street system required them. The Archaeological Parks Guide notes that the main distributor had been damaged by the earthquake and apparently was not in use when the eruption occurred. That warning matters. The network explains how Pompeii had been supplied, but it should not be imagined as a perfect system still delivering everywhere on the city's final day. Cisterns, wells, fountains, repairs, and interrupted pipes belonged to the later picture as well. Public fountains brought water close to many neighborhoods. Their stone basins often stood at street corners, fed by a spout and worn by repeated use. Someone still had to carry the water home. A jar full enough for cooking, washing, and drinking gained weight quickly, and every staircase made the task longer. Access was not equal. A wealthy property might have a private pipe or an ornamental fountain in its garden. A bath complex required a dependable supply for pools and heating. A smaller household might rely on the nearest public basin, its own cistern, a well, or some combination of these. The network joined the city, but it did not remove rank from daily life. Water also had to leave. Rain ran from roofs and courtyards. Used water crossed floors and entered drains or streets. Pompeii's raised pavements and crossing stones helped pedestrians move above water, mud, refuse, and wheeled traffic, though the exact cleanliness of any street changed with place, weather, and maintenance. The lead pipes that survive can look surprisingly modest beside the grand houses they served. Some bear stamped names or marks connected with manufacture, ownership, or authority, but interpreting them requires care. A pipe records a physical connection. It does not always tell us how steady the service was, who opened a valve, or whether the water reached every room people expected it to reach. Maintenance belonged to the system as surely as the aqueduct did. Mineral deposits narrowed pipes, basins needed cleaning, roof tiles shifted, cisterns collected sediment, spouts and joints leaked. A city supplied by gravity still depended on people who noticed when the water no longer followed its intended path. Imagine, if you like, the atrium during a light rain. The roof edges remain in shadow. The floor around the basin darkens one drop at a time. A clay jar waits beside the opening to the cistern. Somewhere beyond the house, water arriving from the hills passes through a tower and continues down another street. The two systems, rain and aqueduct, were not rivals. One belonged to the long memory of the house, the other to civic engineering on a larger scale. Together, they made water visible, falling through a roof, standing in a basin, running from a fountain, being lifted again by hand. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. The brightest square in many Pompeian houses was also the place where rain fell indoors. For a few minutes, the hall held a small private weather, and then the water slipped quietly beneath the floor for another day. Before the street became busy, a bakery could already be warm. Grain arrived in sacks and had to become flour before it could become anything else. In commercial bakeries at Pompeii, it was poured into tall stone mills shaped in two fitted parts. The lower stone stood fixed. The upper piece turned around it, narrowing toward the middle and opening again at the top, like two rough cones meeting point to point. Wooden bars fitted into the upper stone. People or animals pushed those bars around the mill, circling the same small floor while grain fed through the opening and was crushed between the surfaces. The flour that emerged was coarser and less uniform than flour from a modern roller mill. It could be sifted, mixed, and worked according to the bread being made. The surviving mills often stand close together. Beside them are ovens built with rounded baking chambers and narrow mouths, their form not unlike later wood-fired bread ovens. Fuel heated the masonry. Ash and embers were managed. Dough was divided and shaped, while the stored heat prepared the chamber for baking. Some preserved loaves are round and deeply scored into sections. The familiar shape makes them easy to recognize, but even here the archive requires patience. Different bakeries and households made different breads. Carbonized examples preserve only part of the city's food. A loaf found in one context does not become the daily portion of every Pompeian. Commercial scale mattered because producing bread required space, fuel, equipment, water, timing, and labor. Not every dwelling had a kitchen suited to large baking. Bread could move from bakery to customer through direct sale, delivery, shops, taverns, households, and public distributions. The exact route of any one loaf is usually lost. The labor must not be hidden behind the warm oven. Roman slavery was part of Pompeii's economy and its homes. Enslaved people could be made to mill grain, tend animals, carry fuel, knead dough, clean floors, and work the oven. Free and freed workers also took part in food production. The stones do not label every set of hands, but the legal inequality of the city is not in doubt. A bakery complex uncovered in Reggio 9 gives an especially severe example. Its milling room was confined, with high barred windows and controlled access through the house. Indentations in the floor helped guide the repeated path around the mills. Archaeologists have interpreted the space as one in which enslaved workers and animals were held to grind grain. That building should not be made into a plan for every bakery in Pompeii. It is a particular archaeological context, yet neither should its confinement be softened into picturesque craft. Bread could reach a comfortable table through labor performed under coercion, out of sight of the people who ate it. Animals used at mills required fodder, water, handling, and rest, though the surviving arrangement may show how little comfort an owner chose to provide. Human workers faced heat, dust, weight, repetitive movement, and long preparation before customers arrived. The ordinary smell of bread belonged to all of those processes at once. The oven itself kept another schedule. Wood had to burn early enough for masonry to heat. Dough had to be ready when the chamber was cleared. Loaves placed too soon or too late wasted grain and effort. A baker learned the temperature without a numbered dial, reading flame, ash, stone, time, and the color of the crust. When excavation reached Pompeii's bakeries, mills were among the clearest objects left in place. Their size gives the room a purpose immediately. Smaller evidence fills in the process: ovens, troughs, storage vessels, animal remains, worn floors, and bread transformed by heat and burial. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Some round loaves kept the shallow divisions made before baking, 8 sections arranged around the center. The bread was prepared to be broken evenly, but the lines remained unbroken, held in the shape of a meal that never reached the table. By midday, food had moved out toward the pavement. Pompeii's streets were lined with rooms that opened directly onto them. Some were shops, some were workshops. Some combined trade in front with storage, cooking, or living space behind and above. The boundary between household and business could be only a threshold and a wooden shutter. Among the most recognizable counters are those with large round vessels set into masonry. Modern visitors often call every such place a thermopolium, from a Greek-rooted word for a place selling something hot. The ancient labels and actual uses were less tidy. A counter might belong to a food shop, drink shop, inn, or establishment whose exact service cannot now be recovered. The set vessels, called dolia, could hold ingredients, dry goods, liquids, or prepared food depending on the shop and the vessel. Residues, bones, seeds, equipment, and the arrangement of nearby rooms can narrow the possibilities. The shape of a counter alone cannot provide a complete menu. At the Reggio 5 Thermopolium, excavation recovered an unusually rich combination of counter decoration, vessels, animal remains, and other evidence. The find helps archaeologists study food and trade in one establishment. It does not mean every customer throughout Pompeii ate the same dishes or stood at an identical painted counter. Another establishment on the Via dell'Abbondanza is associated with the name Assalina. Painted notices beside the entrance record electoral support for candidates, including endorsements connected with women named at the property. Assalina is often described as the manager or proprietor of the tavern, though the surviving evidence offers a public name and business context rather than a private life story. Women could not vote or hold municipal office in the formal political system of Pompeii, yet election notices show women endorsing candidates. A businesswoman with a wall facing a busy street possessed a useful public surface. The notice placed commerce and politics beside the same doorway. Inside, a counter with inset vessels occupied the front room. Utensils for serving food and drink were found during excavation. Other rooms extended behind it. As with many Pompeian properties, modern labels separate activities that ancient buildings held together: selling, cooking, storing, sleeping, meeting, and sometimes sexual commerce. Customers did not all arrive with the same needs. A worker might buy a quick meal because there was no suitable cooking place at home. A traveler could seek food and information near a gate. A regular might stand long enough to hear local news. An owner could use the wall outside to support a candidate. Cups, coins, jars, benches, and painted plaster moved through the same narrow frontage. Trade depended on small measurements and repeated trust. A customer judged a portion. A seller watched stock diminish. Standard weights could be checked against official measures kept in the forum, but daily exchange still happened at hand level. A scoop, a cup, a coin, a bowl passed across stone. The shop also depended on less visible rooms. Someone fetched water, washed vessels, managed waste, tended a cooking fire, and carried supplies in from the street. A latrine might fit beneath a stair. An upper floor might hold rented rooms or household space, though upper stories are often less completely preserved than the masonry below. At closing time, wooden shutters could turn the open frontage back into a wall. Slots, hinges, thresholds, and fittings preserve parts of that movement. The painted endorsement remained outside after the food was covered and the cups were put away. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Along the edge of a stone counter, the easiest place to set down a cup became the easiest place to set it down again. A faint ring or polished patch could gather from hundreds of small pauses, each customer using the reach that felt natural. Clothing returned from the street, carrying the street with it. Dust settled into wool. Smoke reached fabric from hearths and lamps. Oil, sweat, food, rain, and work left their marks. A garment represented costly fiber and many hours of spinning, weaving, cutting, and sewing, so cleaning and finishing cloth mattered enough to support specialized workshops. The Latin word fullonica is used for a fullery, a place where cloth could be washed, treated, and finished. Pompeii preserves several properties identified with this work, though their sizes and arrangements differ. Basins, vats, working stalls, drains, and open areas reveal a process that required water, movement, and room to handle wet fabric. Cloth might first be soaked with water and cleaning substances. Workers then trod it underfoot in small stalls, pressing and turning it repeatedly. Ancient writers mention alkaline materials, including aged urine, in textile cleaning. It is the detail most modern retellings seize upon, but it was one ingredient in a longer and more skilled sequence, not the whole trade. After washing came rinsing. Water had to be supplied and carried away. Fabric could be brushed, raised, treated, stretched, and dried. Some processes cleaned used clothing, others finished newly woven cloth. The exact work performed in a particular room depends on its equipment and archaeological context. The fullery of Stephanus is among the best-known examples. It occupied a house adapted for commercial use, with working installations placed through spaces that had once followed a more domestic arrangement. The conversion shows the same flexibility we saw in the shops. A property could change purpose while keeping older walls beneath the new work. Wet cloth is heavy. Lifting it from a basin, carrying it across a courtyard, and arranging it to dry took strength and coordination. Brushes and frames required maintenance. Water supply and drainage shaped the day. The smell would have announced parts of the process to neighbors, just as smoke announced a bakery and hammering announced a metal shop. Textile work also appears in Pompeii's public identity. The great building of Eumatia opened from the Forum. Its dedicatory inscription names Eumatia, a public priestess, and her son as sponsors of the building. An honorary statue of her was dedicated by the fullers. That connection has often encouraged the claim that the building itself was the headquarters or market of the wool trade, or that Eumatia's wealth came directly from textiles. The evidence is more cautious. The fullers honored her, and her building occupied a major civic position. Her precise commercial relationship to them remains discussed. What is secure is already useful. A woman could act as a public benefactor and priestess in a political system that excluded women from municipal office. A professional group could express loyalty and gratitude through a statue. Architecture, inscription, labor, and status met around the Forum without becoming one simple business ledger. The workers themselves are harder to see individually. Some may have been free, some freed, and some enslaved. Workshop ownership does not tell us the legal status of every person at a basin. A painted scene can show a task without naming the worker. The uneven archive preserves the patron in stone more readily than the person lifting wet wool. Yet the process leaves its own record. A basin's height suits repeated reaching. A stall confines the movement of feet. A drain shows where water went. A rooftop or open courtyard catches the moving air. These are not grand monuments, but they describe work with unusual clarity. By late afternoon, cleaned cloth could be raised above the workshop to dry. From the street, pale lengths would catch more light than the walls below. The final stage depended on weather, patience, and enough space between one piece and the next. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Once the washing, treading, rinsing, brushing, and lifting were done, the last worker was the breeze. Cloth hung above the roofs, and moving air finished what the hands below had begun. A Pompeian house could present one face to the street and another to the people living behind it. From outside, a large property might appear as a long wall interrupted by doors and shop fronts. The main entrance could frame a view through the house. Passage, atrium, reception room, and garden aligned one beyond another. When the doors and partitions stood open, a visitor at the threshold could see order, water, painted walls, and greenery arranged along a deliberate line. The atrium belonged to work as much as display. Clients and associates might wait there. Household business could be conducted in the tablinum, a room or open space set beyond it. Portraits, cupboards, strongboxes, shrines, and decoration helped communicate the household's claims about itself. Around this center were smaller rooms whose uses changed. Modern plans give them names such as bedroom, dining room, or study, but Roman rooms were often flexible. Furniture could be moved. Bedding could be rolled or carried. A room used for sleeping at one time might serve storage or reception at another. Farther inside, some houses opened onto a peristyle, a garden surrounded by columns. Dining rooms could face painted walls, fountains, trees, and planting beds. The arrangement offered light and air while turning nature into part of the owner's display. The same house also needed a kitchen, latrine, storage, stairs, water, fuel, and places for labor. Service areas could be narrow, smoky, and placed away from the finest line of sight. A visitor invited to recline in a decorated dining room might see the meal arrive without seeing where the pots were scrubbed afterward. Shopfronts complicated the property further. Rooms facing the street could be operated by the household, leased to others, or connected with work performed inside. Upper floors might contain apartments, storage, or additional household rooms. Because timber, roofs, and upper masonry survived less reliably, the ground floor can make Pompeii look more spacious and more elite than the full city was. Many residents lived in settings much smaller than the famous houses. A room behind a shop, a rented upper floor, or part of a divided property left fewer monumental remains. The large domus is easy to map because its walls endure and its paintings attract attention. It should not become the imagined home of every Pompeian. Even within a grand house, access depended on identity and purpose. An owner, child, guest, cook, enslaved attendant, tenant, customer, delivery worker, and political caller did not move through the same doors with the same freedom. Architecture directed people without needing a written sign at every passage. The House of the Faun, one of Pompeii's largest properties, occupied an area that could contain many modest homes. Its 2 atria and 2 peristyles speak of extraordinary wealth, not a standard plan. At the other end of the scale, a single street room might need to hold trade by day and domestic life after shutters closed. Paint also changed the face of a room. Architectural panels, garden scenes, mythological pictures, and blocks of color could make a wall appear deeper, richer, or more ordered than its masonry. Decoration was not only beauty, it selected what visitors should notice. Curtains, doors, and wooden partitions completed that selection. Much of the wood has vanished, leaving open views that ancient occupants could close. A modern visitor may stand where several households would have expected fabric, shutters, furniture, or controlled entry. The most honest reconstruction, therefore, includes absence. The empty room once held objects. The open doorway could be screened. The silent kitchen had people moving through it. A floor plan describes walls, but daily life happened in the choices made between them. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A curtain hung across a formal opening could change the house in a moment. Drawn aside, it extended the view toward the garden. Released again, it made one private room where the stone plan seems to show none. The rooms of Pompeii did not contain one kind of Roman life. Legal status divided the city deeply. Some people were freeborn citizens. Some had been enslaved and later freed. Others remained enslaved, treated in law as property, and compelled to work in households, workshops, farms, shops, and sexual commerce. Citizenship, wealth, gender, age, origin, and family connections shaped what a person could own, where they could go, and whose authority governed them. These categories overlapped without becoming equal. A freed person could build wealth and public standing while still carrying legal and social limits attached to former slavery. A free citizen could be poor. A wealthy woman could sponsor a major building while remaining excluded from voting and office. A child in an elite household and a child born into slavery inherited very different futures. The House of the Vetii makes some of these crossings visible. Its owners, Aulus Vettius Conviva and Aulus Vettius Restitutus, are understood as prosperous freedmen. The house used old architecture and rich new decoration to present status with care. 2 atria organized the property, and a garden opened behind rooms painted with elaborate mythological and decorative scenes. The house also contained service spaces, a kitchen, small rooms, passages, and a modest atrium formed a different landscape from the reception rooms. Near the kitchen was a room decorated with erotic imagery. An inscription at the entrance advertised a woman named Eutyches for a small price, evidence of sexual exploitation attached to the household. The inscription gives a name and a degrading commercial context. It does not give us her thoughts, her daily schedule, or the ending of her life. We should not invent those things to make the evidence feel complete. The limits of the record are part of the dignity owed to the person it reduces to a line of advertising. Names survive in many forms across Pompeii: formal inscriptions, ownership marks, receipts, wax tablets, election notices, labels, and graffiti. Some names belong to people with several monuments. Others appear once. Greek names do not by themselves prove enslaved status, and a house name assigned by modern excavators does not prove ancient ownership. Freed people occupied an important place in the city's economy. Manumission could follow several routes, and obligations to a former owner might remain. Freedom opened possibilities unavailable under enslavement, but it did not repair the coercion that came before or free everyone connected with the household. Work crossed legal categories. A craft workshop might include an owner, relatives, hired workers, freed workers, and enslaved laborers. Archaeology can identify the tools and space more easily than the contract or status of each worker. We know the unequal system even when one person's position remains uncertain. Women appear in property, business, religion, family commemoration, electoral support, and household management. Their legal independence varied with circumstance. The surviving public offices were held by men, but public life was not made by office holders alone. Walls carrying women's endorsements and buildings sponsored by priestesses show influence working around formal exclusion. Children left smaller traces. Toys, tiny objects, graffiti, footprints, burials, and household arrangements offer glimpses, but adults made most of the documents that survive. Childhood also differed according to status. Education, work, nutrition, protection, and the chance of being remembered were unevenly distributed. The city's population included people whose families came from across Italy and the Mediterranean. Trade, military service, enslavement, migration, and marriage moved languages and customs through the Bay of Naples. Pompeii was local and connected at the same time. When we look into a grand room, it is useful to ask who polished the floor, filled the lamp, carried the water, prepared the couch, repaired the curtain, and cleared the cups. Those questions do not reduce art to labor. They restore the people whom the display was designed not to show. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Near a doorway, a name might be scratched with only a few quick strokes. The wall does not tell us why the person came or how long they stayed. It keeps only the smallest proof. Someone stood within reach of the plaster and left a name where another person might see it. Behind stone walls, Pompeii made room for leaves. Some gardens were small plots used for herbs, vegetables, fruit, and household needs. Others were orchards, vineyards, nurseries, or commercial spaces. In wealthy houses, a peristyle garden could be arranged for shade, dining, walking, fountains, sculpture, and carefully framed views. The eruption destroyed living plants, but it did not erase every trace of where they grew. Roots and trunks decayed inside the buried soil, leaving cavities. Excavators could fill some of those hollows with plaster and recover a shape or position. Seeds, pollen, charcoal, fruit stones, planting pots, irrigation features, and soil chemistry add other kinds of evidence. Archaeobotany turns these small remains into careful possibilities. A root cavity may show spacing without identifying every species. Pollen can travel. Seeds can be stored, dropped, eaten, or carried by animals. The strongest reconstructions bring several kinds of evidence together and remain specific to a place. At properties around Pompeii, researchers have identified planting patterns consistent with vines and fruit trees. Kitchen gardens could include useful plants near the rooms that consumed them. Larger planted areas within the walls remind us that the city was not solid masonry. Productive soil occupied valuable urban space. Water shaped what could grow. Rain, cisterns, channels, basins, and hand watering served different gardens. Shade from walls protected some beds while limiting others. Soil needed tending. Pruning, tying, digging, sweeping, harvesting, and carrying were part of the garden's appearance, though paintings prefer to show the finished abundance. Painted gardens covered walls with birds, fruit, fountains, fences, and dense greenery. They could extend a real garden visually beyond its boundary or bring an imagined one into a room. They are valuable evidence for art, taste, and the desired experience of nature. They are not exact planting diagrams. In the house of the fruit orchard, rooms were painted with trees and plants at nearly human scale. The images make enclosed spaces feel open, but the garden on the wall never required watering. The real garden outside depended on labor that decoration could omit. Scent entered the household in many forms. Herbs, flowers, cooking, wine, smoke, animals, drains, and wet earth mixed according to season and room. Modern reconstructions sometimes choose plants for ancient associations, but the precise smell of one Pompeian afternoon cannot be excavated. Gardens also expressed rank. A broad peristyle with marble ornaments and piped fountains required resources unavailable to a tenant living over a shop. Yet a modest pot, a narrow bed, or a climbing plant could bring food or shade to a smaller property. Green space was unequal, without belonging only to the rich. Outside the city walls, the planted landscape expanded into farms, vineyards, orchards, and villas. Pompeii's markets and kitchens depended on that country. Urban gardens supplemented and displayed. They did not feed the whole town by themselves. One of the gentlest facts in the archaeological record is that a missing plant can leave structure behind. Roots widened the soil while alive. After burial and decay, their empty paths remained. What vanished created a mold for later study. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Beneath one garden, narrow hollows kept the spacing of roots after the wood itself was gone. The tree disappeared, but the earth held the shape of where it had reached for water. The warmest rooms in Pompeii were warmed from below. A bath complex required far more than a pool. Visitors moved through spaces designed for changing, warmth, heat, washing, cooling, exercise, conversation, and rest. The sequence varied between buildings and periods, but the machinery behind it remained a constant demand. At the furnace, fuel heated water and air. Hot air passed beneath raised floors through a hypocaust, a low hidden space supported by rows of small brick pillars. In some rooms, hollow tiles helped warmth rise through the walls. Above, stone and plaster held the heat around people who might never see the furnace corridor. The system depended on workers. Wood had to arrive, be stored, cut, and fed into the fire. Water levels had to be managed. Floors, drains, boilers, roofs, and plaster needed repair. Towels, oil, scraping tools, sandals, cups, and personal belongings created other kinds of labor around the bath. Pompeii had several public bath complexes. The Stabian baths developed over a long period and combined bathing rooms with an exercise court. The Forum baths served another part of the city. The central baths were under construction and not finished when the city was buried, another large project caught in the middle of making. There were also private bathing suites in wealthy properties. Recent excavation in Regio 9 has revealed an especially large private complex connected with spaces for dining and display. Such a suite could help an owner host guests, build relationships, and demonstrate resources without using a public facility. Public did not mean socially equal. Access, timing, fees, custom, gender, status, and patronage could shape who used which rooms and when. Evidence for schedules is not identical across every bath or every period. It is safer to see bathing as a flexible social institution than as one universal routine followed by all Romans. The rooms themselves guided the body. A changing room offered benches, shelves, niches, or attendants to watch belongings. A warm room prepared the skin. A hot room held denser heat near basins or a hot water bath. A cold basin provided contrast. Oil could be applied and removed with a curved scraper called a strigil. Water did not need to be deep to be costly. Every basin added weight, heat, drainage, and cleaning. A decorative fountain might share the building with practical pipes hidden in walls. Steam and condensation tested plaster. Soot marked the service side of a room whose public side might shine with stucco and colored stone. Baths carried news as well as water. People met acquaintances, discussed business, arranged favors, heard campaigns, exercised, or waited for companions. Yet quiet uses also belonged there. Warmth on tired muscles, dust washed from skin, a few minutes away from a workshop. The archaeological building is now cool and open to the sky in places where roofs once held heat. Without doors, glazing, braziers, bodies, fabric, and fire, the surviving rooms can seem larger and less intimate than they were. Reconstruction requires adding function without pretending every hour is known. Below it all, the brick pillars stood close together. They were small enough to overlook and numerous enough to carry a floor. Heat moved through the spaces between them, making comfort above from a dark service chamber below. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Beneath a bathhouse floor, hundreds of short brick columns held the room just high enough for warm air to pass. Every relaxed footstep rested on a hidden field of careful masonry. Pompeii held elections on plaster. Along busy streets, painted notices asked eligible voters to support candidates for municipal office. The surviving Latin is often abbreviated, fitted into planned lines, and made large enough to read from the road. Names and offices mattered most. Praise followed in familiar formulas: a worthy man, a good man, someone requested by neighbors, or a professional group. These notices are called programmata by modern scholars. They were painted rather than scratched. A wall might first receive a pale rectangular ground, creating a cleaner surface over older decoration or an earlier message. A sign writer then laid out the letters with brush and pigment, sometimes assisted by another worker carrying a lamp or preparing paint. Professional skill is visible in the spacing. Letters had to remain balanced across an uneven wall. A long name needed room. The painter worked around doorways, patches, corners, and earlier writing. At night or in low light, shadows complicated every stroke. Municipal offices included aediles, who had responsibilities connected with streets, markets, public order and games, and duumvirs, the pair of senior magistrates who presided over civic business. The precise powers changed over time and were bounded by Roman law, local custom, wealth, and status. Formal political participation was narrow. Women could not vote or hold these offices. Enslaved people were excluded, and citizenship and legal standing mattered. Even among eligible men, influence was not evenly shared. Wealthy families, patrons, trade connections, and public generosity helped shape a campaign. The walls, nevertheless, show political activity beyond the ballot. Women endorsed candidates. Innkeepers, bakers, fullers, neighbors, and other groups appeared in notices. An endorsement did not erase exclusion, but it made a public claim about whose support should matter. At Asalina's establishment, women's names are associated with electoral recommendations painted near the entrance. Elsewhere, newly uncovered notices preserve candidates from what archaeologists interpret as the city's last campaign. A fresh layer of white paint sometimes covered an older message, making politics visible as a sequence rather than a single election. Graffiti belonged to a different practice. It was scratched, written, or drawn onto walls by many kinds of hands. Names, greetings, numbers, verses, insults, affection, games, records, and sketches gathered in public and private spaces. Some texts were careful, others were brief marks. Their meaning depends on where they were placed and what surrounded them. Recent study of graffiti in a theater corridor treats the writing as a connected social field, not a bag of amusing quotations. Position, height, overlap, handwriting, drawings, and nearby texts can reveal how people returned to a place and responded to what was already there. Translation can make these walls sound more complete than they are. Letters are lost. Abbreviations allow alternatives. A familiar phrase may be reconstructed from comparison. The safest script keeps uncertainty attached to the text instead of smoothing every fragment into a perfect modern sentence. The painted notices also remind us that the buried city was looking forward. Candidates expected terms of office. Painters expected more work. Supporters expected results, favors, disappointments, and another campaign later. A wall prepared for a new name is evidence of unfinished civic time. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Before the candidate's name appeared, someone brushed a neat rectangle of pale paint over the wall. For a little while, it held no message at all, only a clean space waiting for politics to begin again. Religion in Pompeii did not wait behind a temple door. It appeared in kitchens, gardens, workshops, crossroads, dining rooms, public buildings, tombs, and painted niches. A household shrine, often called a lararium, could hold images of protective spirits, ancestors, snakes associated with place and abundance, or gods chosen by the household. Its form ranged from a simple painted panel to a small architectural structure. Offerings were usually ordinary things: wine, incense, grain, cakes, fruit, flowers, and lamplight could mark repeated attention. The scale mattered less than the act. A pinch of meal and a few quiet words connected divine protection with cooking, business, family, and the day's uncertain work. Not every resident understood a shrine in exactly the same way. Household religion changed with family origin, status, fashion, and circumstance. Enslaved people living under another person's authority might bring traditions and private attachments that the decorated wall does not record. At street intersections, shrines placed protection in shared space. In workshops, divine images stood near trade. A shopkeeper could begin business beneath painted figures. A garden shrine joined cultivated soil with household continuity. Sacred and practical space were not opposites. Pompeii's public sanctuaries served different communities and histories. Venus was closely tied to the Roman colony and its civic identity. Apollo had a sanctuary beside the Forum with a much older history. The Temple of Isis, rebuilt after earthquake damage, belonged to a cult with roots in Egypt and followers across the Roman world. An inscription at the Temple of Isis records that a young boy named Numerius Papidius Celsinus formally paid for its rebuilding, with the expense understood to have come from his family. The dedication helped the family display generosity and status. Public religion, reconstruction, and social ambition could occupy the same stone. The imperial household also received ritual honor. Temples, priesthoods, images, festivals, and dedications linked local civic life with Rome's ruling power. Participation could express loyalty, opportunity, habit, or community identity without allowing us to measure private belief. After the earthquake, sacred buildings did not all recover at the same pace. Some were repaired or rebuilt, others remained incomplete. At the Temple of Venus, excavation has identified material connected with restoration, including lime associated with building work. Even the city's patron sanctuary appears to have been interrupted while being made ready again. The unfinished temple returns us to the through line of the city. Religion did not float above damaged roofs and budgets. It required masons, donors, stone, timber, paint, decisions, and time. A dedication named the sponsor more readily than the worker who mixed the mortar. At home, ritual could remain much smaller. A lamp wick was trimmed, a cup was lifted, a little food was set aside. The shrine stood near smoke, tools, storage jars, and footsteps, receiving attention inside the same rooms where practical needs pressed close. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Before work began, a household shrine might receive a pinch of meal, one drop of wine, and a lamp newly trimmed. The offering was small enough to fit in a hand and repeated often enough to become part of the room. As daylight lowered, Pompeii did not close all at once. Some workshops had begun before dawn and were ready to quiet. Other businesses expected evening customers. Baths held the warmth accumulated through the day. Food and drink shops prepared for people leaving work. Doors opened and shut according to labor, status, season, and the amount of oil left for lamps. The street changed before it emptied. Long shadows reached across stepping stones. Wheels and animals still moved through gates. Water continued from fountain spouts. A shopkeeper brought goods inward from the threshold. Wooden shutters fitted together across a frontage, one panel at a time. Public entertainment followed larger schedules. Pompeii had a large theater, a smaller covered theater, and an amphitheater. Performances and games were not nightly background. They were organized events tied to calendars, patrons, money, civic generosity, and public reputation. The amphitheater could hold a crowd drawn from the city and surrounding country. An inscription and ancient account preserved the memory of a violent disturbance between Pompeians and visitors from New Syria during games in the year 59. Rome punished the city with restrictions. The event shows that entertainment could sharpen local identity, though most evenings left no comparable written record. Taverns and dining rooms operated on different scales. In a wealthy house, guests reclined around a meal served through the labor of the household. In a street establishment, customers might drink, eat, talk, gamble, arrange business, or rent a room. The surviving cups and counters cannot tell us the mood of every gathering. Light imposed a cost. A terracotta lamp held oil and a wick. It illuminated a small area, left soot, required trimming, and had to be carried carefully. Larger houses could distribute many lamps. A modest room might choose one useful flame and let the corners remain dark. Moonlight reached open courtyards and streets, but roofs and upper stories narrowed it. Painted walls changed as colors receded. A mosaic floor visible at noon became a pattern found by memory and lamplight. People who knew the house needed less light to cross it. Noise also shifted rather than disappearing. Conversation passed through open windows. Crockery moved behind a counter. A furnace settled. Animals were brought under cover. Somewhere a hammer continued against a repair that had taken longer than expected. Upper rooms mattered more after shutters closed below. They may have held tenants, families, workers, or storage. Their floors and walls survive unevenly, so the evening population of the street is partly missing from the open ruins. Light once appeared above facades that now stop at the ground level. There was no universal Roman bedtime. Agricultural work, commercial work, domestic service, guarding, travel, illness, childcare, entertainment, and wealth created different nights. The safest picture is not a city falling silent at 1 hour, but thousands of households deciding separately how long to keep a flame. At last, fewer doorways remained open. The Via dell'Abbondanza narrowed into bands of amber and blue. A late customer stepped between the crossing stones. Behind one shutter, accounts were counted. Behind another, bedding was arranged in a room that had served trade during the day. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. A small clay lamp held only a little oil. Each evening, someone decided which task deserved the flame and which room could be left to the dark. Return now to the patched wall near the beginning of our walk. The earthquake in the early 60s damaged Pompeii severely enough to enter the written record and to leave structural evidence across the city. Buildings cracked or collapsed, roofs shifted, fires broke out in some places, streets filled with material that had to be sorted, removed, or reused. Recovery did not follow one citywide schedule. Owners had different resources. Public projects required decisions and funding. Some properties changed hands or function. Later tremors may have caused new damage. What appears to be slow repair in one building may have been a deliberate redesign in another. Along the Via della Bonanza, excavation has identified shops altered after earthquake damage. Floors were rebuilt, walls repaired, and rooms changed in use. A property probably transformed into a food or drink establishment. Disaster recovery became commercial adaptation, not simply restoration to an earlier plan. At the Temple of Venus, a layer of lime has been connected with work to restore the sanctuary. Elsewhere, old plaster was covered with newer decoration. Doorways were blocked or opened. Masonry of different techniques met in the same wall. Salvaged stone and tile saved cost and time. Lime was essential and demanding. Limestone had to be burned, slaked carefully with water, mixed, carried, and applied. Sand and aggregate changed the mortar or plaster according to purpose. A finished painted wall hid much of this preparation beneath a smooth surface. Scaffolding brought workers to upper walls. Timber poles, ropes, platforms, baskets, trowels, plumb lines, and measuring tools occupied rooms that modern visitors see empty. Work created temporary architecture around permanent architecture. Decoration proceeded in stages. Plaster layers were applied while conditions allowed. Pigments and painted borders followed. A room could be habitable while another remained rough. A property owner might concentrate money on the reception rooms visitors saw and postpone service areas. The city therefore held old damage, completed repair, new fashion, and unfinished work together. A bright fourth-style painting did not prove the whole house had recovered. An unplastered wall did not prove abandonment. Context decides what the surface can support. Modern archaeology has also repaired Pompeii, adding another visible layer. Excavated walls lost the protective burial that had preserved them. Rain, sun, plants, vibration, and earlier restoration materials caused new problems. Roof covers, drainage, mortar, supports, and conservation programs became necessary to keep ancient repair from disappearing after discovery. The distinction between ancient and modern work must remain legible. Conservators document materials and interventions so future researchers can understand what belongs to which phase. The city continues to be maintained, though the purpose has changed from habitation to preservation. Unfinished work is sometimes treated as a flaw in the Roman city, evidence that Pompeii had failed to recover. It is more humane to recognize what every inhabited place contains. There is always a roof awaiting tile, a wall awaiting paint, an invoice awaiting payment, and a tool set down because daylight has ended. The eruption made those pauses permanent, but it did not create them. They belonged to ordinary construction before they became archaeological evidence. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Beside an unfinished wall, a container of lime and a few tools could preserve the shape of the next task. The completed rooms show what owners wanted visitors to see. The waiting plaster shows what a worker meant to do tomorrow. For 13 chapters, Vesuvius has remained where it stood in ordinary Pompeian life, beyond the roofs, part of the northern landscape. In the year 79, that ordinary relationship ended. The mountain began an eruption that sent a high column of material into the sky. Pumice and ash fell across the region. At Pompeii, deposits accumulated, roofs came under increasing weight, and movement through the city became harder. Later phases brought destructive currents of hot ash, gas, and debris. The sequence has been reconstructed from volcanic layers, buildings, human remains, objects, and written testimony. Details continue to be studied. The event lasted many hours and changed character as it proceeded, but a calm summary should not become an imagined minute-by-minute experience for people whose own accounts do not survive. Many residents escaped. Evidence from the city cannot give a simple total for everyone who left, returned, sheltered, or died elsewhere. Others died at Pompeii and around the bay. Their deaths should be stated plainly and allowed to rest. We do not need to supply final words, terror, or private thoughts the archive did not preserve. Pliny the Younger provides the best-known literary account. He was at Misenum, across the bay, not inside Pompeii. Decades later, he wrote 2 letters to the historian Tacitus describing what he had witnessed and what he learned about his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who commanded the fleet and crossed the bay during the eruption. The letters are invaluable and carefully observed, but they are not a transcript of Pompeii's streets. Their manuscript history also contributes to a continuing argument over the eruption's date. A traditional reading places it on the 24th of August. Archaeological finds, seasonal material, coin evidence, wind patterns, and a charcoal inscription have supported an autumn date for many scholars. Other researchers defend the manuscript evidence for August or question whether each autumn clue is decisive. The honest conclusion is narrower than a calendar square. The eruption occurred in the year 79. Its exact date remains debated. Nothing in tonight's ordinary walk depends on pretending that debate has ended. Pumice and ash buried buildings while also damaging them. Roofs and upper floors collapsed. Organic material burned, decayed, or left voids. Objects shifted. People carried possessions away. Tunnels, ancient recovery, and later disturbance changed the deposits further. Pompeii was preserved through destruction, not placed gently under a cover. For centuries, much of the city remained hidden. Excavation began under Bourbon rule in the 18th century, at first often through tunnels seeking sculpture, paintings, and valuable objects. Records and methods improved unevenly. The exposed city helped transform European ideas about ancient art and daily life, while also losing contexts to the priorities of early digging. In the 19th century, Giuseppe Fiorelli developed the method most associated with Pompeii's casts. When excavators found cavities in hardened ash where organic material had decayed, plaster could be poured into the void. Once surrounding material was removed, the cast preserved an outer form, sometimes a wooden object, a door, a root, an animal, or a person. The human casts are not sculptures made for display. They are products of an archaeological method applied to spaces left around human remains, and some contain bones within them. Conservation, study, display, and imaging carry ethical responsibilities. The people represented should not be reduced to dramatic poses or used to decorate a promise of catastrophe. Excavation also changes what it reveals. A buried wall may be stable until air and rain reach it. Pigments fade, mortar loosens, plants enter cracks. Every new area creates a long obligation to document, shelter, drain, conserve, and sometimes leave material unexcavated until better methods or resources exist. A substantial part of ancient Pompeii remains buried. That is not empty ground waiting impatiently for discovery. It is protected archaeological context. Leaving it in place can preserve evidence more effectively than opening it without the means to care for it. The city above ground is also not finished. Researchers return to old notebooks, storerooms, casts, walls, soil samples, and excavation records with new questions. A vessel once catalogued as decoration may hold residue. A wall inscription can be photographed under different light. An upper floor may be reconstructed from beam holes and fallen material. Interpretation changes because evidence is revisited, not because the past changes beneath it. Walk back now to the threshold where we began. The worn center still records feet passing through. Outside, wheel grooves run between crossing stones. Inside, rain falls through a roof opening into a basin. Farther along, grain waits beside a mill, cloth waits for moving air, a campaign wall waits for a name, and lime waits beside an unfinished repair. Those waiting things are not omens. They are ordinary work interrupted. Pompeii matters because its people were living forward, expecting bread to be eaten, water to be carried, votes to be counted, walls to dry, and lamps to be filled again. The eruption preserved traces of those expectations, but it also broke, moved, buried, and transformed them. Excavation revealed some traces and altered them again. The archive is richest when all those layers remain visible. At dusk, modern covers protect ancient walls. Conservation tools are gathered beside a doorway whose old plaster stops halfway across the masonry. The mountain is quiet in the distance. No single room can speak for the whole city, and no single day can contain every life that passed through it. We can leave the file with the work unfinished. That is how Pompeii was living, and it is how careful study continues. One wall, one seed, one pipe, one name, one measured uncertainty at a time. That's where I'll close the file for tonight. The archive will be here tomorrow. It always is. Sleep well.